Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the schoolyard, his hands tightly gripping the worn straps of his backpack. The worn fabric, faded from years of use, felt like a constant reminder of his place in the world. The sleek, polished campus of Bellwood Academy, a private school renowned for its exclusivity, seemed to mock his every move. Students around him wore expensive clothes, carried the latest gadgets, and spoke with a confidence that Ethan had never known. The marble columns of the school building towered above him, casting long shadows over the courtyard. Everything about this place screamed wealth, privilege, and entitlement, while Ethan felt out of place in his scuffed shoes and frayed pants. He had never been able to afford the luxuries his classmates enjoyed, but he had always held his head high, determined to make the best of his situation. Today, however, that determination was crushed. He could still hear Principal Montgomery's voice echoing in his ears, cold and unforgiving. "Ethan, I'm afraid we can no longer allow you to attend this school," the principal had said, his tone dismissive. "Bellwood Academy has high standards, and your family's financial situation doesn't meet them. This is a school for students who have the means to thrive here, and you simply don't." Ethan's stomach churned with a mix of anger and humiliation. He had always been a diligent student, always striving to keep up with the academic rigor, despite the odds stacked against him. Yet none of it mattered to Principal Montgomery. To him, Ethan was nothing more than a symbol of everything that didn't belong. A poor, out-of-place boy who didn't fit the mold of Bellwood Academy. The whispers had started immediately. As soon as the principal's words sank in, the other students gathered in small groups, muttering and pointing in his direction. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, some with pity, others with disdain. His cheeks burned with shame, but he refused to let the tears well up. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him cry. "You don't belong here," one student sneered as he passed by, barely masking the mockery in his voice. Ethan turned his gaze to the ground, willing the moment to end, but it only seemed to drag on. He had always known he was different. His family had always struggled financially, but his mother worked tirelessly to make sure he had everything he needed. Still, there were days when he couldn't shake the feeling that he was just an outsider, a reminder of how far the gap between rich and poor could stretch. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Ethan slowly made his way to the exit, his heart heavy with the weight of rejection. He had always dreamed of being a part of this world, the world of the students in crisp uniforms, with fancy cars and vacations in exotic places. But now, he understood that some dreams were not meant to be realized. He stepped outside and into the chill of the afternoon, the wind tugging at the collar of his jacket. The campus, once a symbol of his aspirations, now felt like a place of broken promises. He looked up at the grand gates of Bellwood Academy one last time, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Was it really over? Had he truly failed to belong? As he walked down the steps, his backpack bouncing against his back, he could hear the laughter of the other students echoing behind him. It was as if his entire existence had been reduced to a joke, a punchline no one had asked for. But deep inside, a small ember of defiance flickered. Ethan knew he couldn't give up. He had dreams, big dreams, that didn't depend on a school's approval. He wouldn't let this rejection define him. He couldn't. Just as he reached the sidewalk, something caught his eye. A black limousine pulled up to the school gates, its glossy surface gleaming under the fading sun. Ethan paused, wondering who could possibly be arriving at this time of day. His gaze was drawn to the back door as it swung open, revealing a tall man in a sleek suit. He stepped out with an air of confidence that seemed to command attention, his presence immediately drawing the gaze of everyone around. Ethan didn't recognize him, but he could sense that this man was someone important, someone with power. The students who had been whispering just moments ago now stood frozen, eyes wide in awe as the man approached the front doors of Bellwood Academy. Ethan turned his head away, unwilling to get caught up in yet another spectacle, but as he continued walking away, something in the back of his mind urged him to look back. Before he could stop himself, his eyes darted toward the gates once more. The man had stopped at the entrance and turned to face the crowd. His sharp gaze scanned the area, landing on Ethan for a brief moment. It was a look of quiet recognition. But then, just as quickly, the man turned and disappeared through the doors, leaving Ethan with an unsettling feeling in his gut. Who was that? He whispered to himself, but the question was drowned out by the loud hum of the limousine's engine as it sped away. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent, and Ethan felt as though he was living in a dream where nothing made sense. As he walked home that evening, the image of the man in the suit lingered in his thoughts. What was this strange encounter all about? And why did it feel like it had something to do with him? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Little did he know, the following day would bring a twist that no one could have predicted. The next morning, the campus of Bellwood Academy was quiet, still wrapped in the early morning fog. Ethan woke up early, the same knot of anxiety settling in his stomach. He had barely slept, the events of the day before replaying over and over in his mind like a loop he couldn't escape. The sharp sting of rejection, the cruel words of Principal Montgomery, and the dismissive looks from the students who had once seemed like the future of everything Ethan could never have. It all felt like a weight too heavy to carry. As he trudged down the stairs of his modest home, the smell of burnt toast and the soft hum of his mother's voice filled the air. His mother, Miriam Carter, was already at work in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She smiled warmly at Ethan, though her eyes betrayed the exhaustion she'd been carrying for years. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" she asked, but Ethan could hear the worry in her tone. She had always been his rock, and he knew she could sense something was wrong. But he didn't have the heart to tell her about the expulsion. Not yet. "Fine, Mom," he replied, forcing a small smile. "Just tired from studying so hard for that math test yesterday." His mother raised an eyebrow, unconvinced by his attempt to brush off the truth. But she didn't press him further. Instead, she handed him a plate of eggs and toast, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had been balancing work, family, and struggle for years. Ethan accepted the meal without much thought, his mind drifting elsewhere. Once he finished his breakfast, he grabbed his backpack, the same one that had seen him through countless school days, and slung it over his shoulder. He stepped out the front door, the cool morning air hitting his face like a splash of water. He could see the familiar path to Bellwood Academy ahead. But today, it felt different. Every step seemed heavier, each one bringing him closer to something unknown. As he reached the gates of Bellwood, he hesitated. The towering structure loomed in front of him, its grandiose design mocking him, reminding him of everything he didn't have. The marble walls, the gleaming windows, the perfectly manicured lawns, all of it seemed like a distant dream. But today the gates were wide open, and the usual hum of students arriving was strangely absent. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Something was off. He glanced around and saw a few students gathered near the football field, their eyes glued to the sky. Ethan's curiosity piqued, and he followed their gaze. At first, he thought it was just another plane passing overhead. But as the sound grew louder, a massive black helicopter appeared, its blades slicing through the air with a deafening roar. The students gasped in awe as the helicopter descended onto the football field with a precision that spoke to the wealth and power behind it. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He watched in stunned silence as the helicopter landed, its rotor blades flowing to a stop. The ground vibrated beneath his feet, and the noise of the helicopter slowly faded away, replaced by an eerie stillness. Ethan had no idea who could be arriving in such an extravagant manner, but something about this felt different. The door of the helicopter swung open, and out stepped a tall man in a sharp, tailored suit. His presence was commanding, and the students around Ethan gasped and murmured, some pulling out their phones to snap pictures, others simply standing in stunned silence. The man seemed to survey the crowd for a moment, his dark eyes scanning the gathered students before they fixed on something, or rather someone. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as the man's gaze locked onto him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and suddenly, it was just Ethan and the stranger standing at the center of the field. The tall man took a step forward, his expression unreadable. Ethan's mind raced. Who was this person? Why was he looking at him like that? He stood frozen, unsure of what to do, unsure if he should even move. But before he could gather his thoughts, the man's voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. "You must be Ethan Carter," the man said, his tone not asking, but knowing. Ethan's heart skipped another beat. How did he know his name? Yes, Ethan managed, his voice betraying the confusion swirling in his mind. The man smiled, though it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the kind of smile that spoke of power, of knowing something no one else did. "I'm Thomas Everett," the man said, "and I've been looking for you." Ethan blinked, unsure of what he was hearing. "Looking for me? But why?" Thomas's smile widened slightly, though his eyes remained serious. "I believe we need to talk." Before Ethan could ask any more questions, the principal, Richard Montgomery, appeared from the school's entrance. His face was pale, his usual stern expression replaced with one of complete shock. He approached the two of them, his steps slow and uncertain, as though the very sight of Thomas Everett had knocked the air out of him. "Mr. Everett," Principal Montgomery stammered, his voice trembling. I wasn't expecting you today. What brings you to Bellwood Academy?" Thomas's eyes never left Ethan. "I'm here because of this young man." His gaze softened just a fraction, though the intensity of his presence remained. "I have a feeling Bellwood Academy isn't the right place for him." Principal Montgomery's eyes widened, and he looked between Ethan and the man with a mixture of confusion and fear. "What do you mean?" "Ethan has already been expelled." Thomas turned his attention back to the principal, his expression darkening. "Expelled?" His voice dropped to a low growl, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of anger. "You expelled him because he didn't fit your standards, is that it?" Principal Montgomery stammered, his face going pale. That's not how it happened." But Thomas was no longer listening. Instead, he turned to Ethan, his gaze softening. "Ethan, pack your things. You're coming with me." For a moment, Ethan just stared at him, overwhelmed by the turn of events. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. What was happening? Who was this man? And why was he helping him? Thomas Everett reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black business card and handing it to Ethan. "This is just the beginning," Thomas said, his voice steady. "You have a future, Ethan. A future that's bigger than this school, bigger than anything you've ever imagined." Ethan stared at the card in his hand, his heart racing. Could it be true? Was this his chance to change everything? Before he could speak, Thomas turned, motioning for Ethan to follow. Without looking back, Ethan took a step forward, his life taking a turn he could never have anticipated. Ethan followed Thomas Everett across the football field, his steps unsteady, his mind struggling to catch up with the surreal turn his life had just taken. The wind was sharper now, the early morning mist beginning to dissipate, but his thoughts were clouded with confusion. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting Principal Montgomery to call them back or the students to start laughing, but they were all too stunned to move. The helicopter stood like a dark sentinel in the background, its presence still powerful and unyielding. As they reached the edge of the field, Thomas turned to Ethan. "Don't worry about them," he said softly. "This is about you, not them." Ethan nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. He was used to being overlooked, to blending into the background. But this was different. People noticed him now. A billionaire had noticed him. They walked toward a sleek black car parked near the edge of the school's property. Ethan could see the driver sitting in the front, his face expressionless as he waited for them. Thomas opened the door for Ethan, motioning for him to get in. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas smiled, a knowing look crossing his features. To a place where people understand that potential isn't defined by your background. Ethan hesitated for a moment before sliding into the back seat. His heart raced, the questions still tumbling through his mind. Who was this man? What did he want with him? And why had he come to Bellwood Academy just to find him? The car began to move, and the city skyline started to fade behind them. They passed through neighborhoods Ethan had never seen before, places that seemed worlds apart from the modest street he called home. The buildings grew taller, the streets wider, and the cars more luxurious. It was like a different world altogether. As they drove, Thomas spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Ethan, I'm not here to explain everything to you all at once. That wouldn't be fair. But what I can tell you is this. You're not the person people think you are. Not the boy they saw in that school. Not the poor kid they thought they could just throw away. You have a purpose. You have potential." Ethan blinked, trying to process the weight of Thomas's words. "But I don't understand. Why me? What's so special about me?" Thomas glanced over at him, his expression thoughtful. "You've been living with the belief that your circumstances define you, haven't you? That because you don't have what other people have, you can't be something bigger than yourself." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, the truth of it stinging. It wasn't that he hadn't wanted more. He had dreamed of more, longed for more. But how could he ever expect to have it when he barely had enough to make it through each day? "You're wrong," Thomas continued, his voice quiet but firm. "Your background doesn't define you, Ethan. It never has. But what you choose to do with it, that's what will shape your future." The car slowed as it entered a private drive. A large estate loomed ahead, its gates tall and imposing, guarded by men who looked like they could have stepped out of a high-security facility. The driver rolled down the window, nodded to the guards, and the gates swung open. As they drove up the long, winding path, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This place was nothing like anything he'd ever seen. It was more than just a mansion. It was a fortress, a world apart from anything he could have imagined. The house was grand, made of polished stone and glass, with sweeping lawns and manicured gardens. There were fountains and sculptures scattered throughout the property, and Ethan couldn't help but feel small in comparison to the sprawling luxury surrounding him. The car came to a stop in front of the house, and Thomas got out first, then turned to offer Ethan a hand. Ethan hesitated for a moment before taking it, stepping out into a world that seemed so far removed from the life he knew. "You must be wondering why I brought you here," Thomas said as they walked up the stairs toward the front door. "It's simple, really. I believe you have the ability to be more than you think you are, but you can't do it alone. You need the right people to help you realize your potential." Inside, the house was even more impressive than Ethan had imagined. The walls were adorned with large paintings, each one more beautiful than the last. The furniture was luxurious, the floors gleaming with a polished shine. It was a space that felt alive with success, with history, and with possibility. A woman appeared at the top of the staircase, her presence commanding the room as she descended. She was tall, elegant, and exuded an air of authority. Thomas smiled when he saw her. "This is my sister, Victoria," he said, introducing her with a quiet pride. Victoria gave Ethan a warm smile, her eyes kind but piercing. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan. Thomas has spoken very highly of you." Ethan nodded, still feeling like a fish out of water. He wasn't sure how to act in a place like this, around people like this, but there was something about Victoria's presence that made him feel less out of place. It was as if she could see him, truly see him, and that made all the difference. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Thomas led Ethan to a large study, its walls lined with bookshelves. The room smelled of leather and wood, and Ethan felt a strange sense of awe wash over him. This was the world of people who made decisions that affected nations, who shaped industries, who had the power to change lives. Thomas motioned for Ethan to sit. "This is where your journey begins, Ethan. I've arranged for you to attend a new school." one that values talent and hard work above all else. Bellwood wasn't the right fit for you, but that's not where your story ends. This is just the beginning of something much bigger. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Thomas replied. Just know that everything you're seeing, is the result of hard work, vision, and the belief that no one should be judged by their circumstances. You have the same potential, Ethan. You just need the opportunity. Ethan sat in stunned silence. The world he had known, the limitations that had once defined his life, suddenly seemed so small. A future filled with possibility stretched out before him, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he might actually have a chance to reach it. The days that followed were nothing short of a whirlwind for Ethan. After the dramatic events at Bellwood Academy, where he had gone from being expelled to becoming the center of attention in a matter of hours, his life had taken an unexpected turn. Thomas Everett, the billionaire who had stepped into his life like a force of nature, wasn't just offering Ethan a way out of the small town he'd grown up in. He was offering him a future, one Ethan had never dreamed possible. The new school was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. It was an elite academy, a place where the world's most brilliant minds were nurtured. Located on a sprawling campus, surrounded by state-of-the-art facilities, the school looked more like a college campus than a high school. From the moment Ethan stepped onto the campus grounds, he could feel the difference. The students walked with purpose, heads held high, each one seemingly focused on their own goals, on their own path to greatness. No one sneered at him here. No one looked down on him for his hand-me-down clothes or his humble beginnings. In fact, he wasn't treated as an outsider at all. People were curious, but not in a way that made him feel small. They seemed genuinely interested in him, his story, his dreams. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt seen. As the days passed, he adjusted to his new environment, but it wasn't without challenges. The school was demanding, pushing him to his limits both academically and socially. There were moments when he doubted himself, when he wondered if he was truly worthy of the opportunities that had been handed to him. How could he, a kid from a poor background, fit in with these brilliant, driven students? How could he, with no prior experience in anything remotely resembling this world, succeed here? But every time those doubts crept in, he reminded himself of one simple fact. This was his chance. This was the opportunity he'd been given, and it was up to him to make the most of it. Thomas had been right all along. The school didn't judge Ethan based on his past, and it didn't matter that he had been expelled from a place that had deemed him unworthy. It only mattered what he did now, what he would do with this opportunity. And slowly, he began to realize something that both scared and excited him. He had the power to shape his future. He found himself in classes with some of the brightest students he had ever met. His science lab partner, Maya, was a prodigy in robotics, creating inventions that could potentially change the world. His history teacher, Mr. Fisher, had worked as a political advisor to world leaders. Each person he met here seemed to have a story of incredible achievement, and each person was willing to share their knowledge with him. The students weren't just competing against one another. They were collaborating, learning from each other, and helping each other grow. It was a culture of excellence, and Ethan couldn't help but be swept up in it. But even in this new world, there were challenges. There were times when he felt like an imposter, when the pressure to perform at this level felt overwhelming. There were moments when he had to fight the urge to retreat into the comfort of his old life, where expectations were lower, where he didn't have to prove himself every single day. He missed the simplicity of his previous life, the quiet nights at home with his mom, the small joys of life before it had been turned upside down. But he knew that he couldn't go back to that life. Not now. Thomas's influence loomed large in Ethan's life. He was a constant presence, checking in on him, offering guidance, and ensuring that Ethan had everything he needed to succeed. But it wasn't just Thomas's wealth or his power that drew Ethan to him. It was his unwavering belief in Ethan's potential. Thomas had seen something in him that no one else had ever noticed, And that belief was something Ethan could feel deep in his bones, driving him to keep pushing, even when the road ahead seemed insurmountable. One evening, as Ethan sat in his dorm room, poring over his homework, there was a knock at the door. He looked up to see Maya standing in the doorway, her usual confident smile replaced by an expression of concern. "Hey," she said, stepping inside. "Can we talk?" Ethan set his books aside, sensing that this wasn't just a casual visit. "What's up?" Maya hesitated before speaking, her voice softer than usual. "I've noticed you've been keeping to yourself a lot lately. You don't talk much about where you're from, and you've been kind of quiet in class. I get it. It's a lot to take in. But you don't have to do this alone. You've got a whole group of people here who want to see you succeed. Don't shut us out." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. Maya had been nothing but kind to him since they first met. She was smart, funny, and incredibly driven, and he could see how much she genuinely cared about him. But he wasn't used to letting people in. He had spent so many years learning to protect himself, to keep his feelings hidden, that it was hard to open up now. "I appreciate that," Ethan said, his voice quieter than he intended. "It's just, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I don't belong here, like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." Maya took a step closer, her eyes steady. "You're not pretending, Ethan. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. You've earned your place here, just like anyone else. I know it's hard, but you've got to stop doubting yourself. This school isn't about where you came from. It's about where you're going. And trust me, I think you're going to do amazing things." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected. For the first time, someone had acknowledged his fears without dismissing them. Maya wasn't telling him to just get over it, or stop being so negative. She was validating his struggles, but she was also pushing him to rise above them. "I'll try," Ethan said, a small, uncertain smile creeping onto his face. "Thanks, Maya. Really." Maya smiled back, giving him a quick hug before heading toward the door. "Don't mention it. We're in this together." As Ethan sat back down at his desk, his mind began to shift. He could still feel the weight of his old life pressing against him, but now, it didn't seem so heavy. There was a future ahead of him, a future filled with possibilities, and it was up to him to make it happen. No more running from the challenges, no more pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was Ethan Carter, and he was ready to fight for his future. The weeks that followed were a blur of tests, classes, and new experiences. Ethan found himself constantly on the edge of exhaustion, both physically and mentally. Every day felt like a race against time, a constant push to prove himself worthy of the life he had been thrust into. But amid the pressure, something began to change within him. The quiet boy who had once walked through life as if he didn't belong now began to stand taller, his shoulders a little more squared. His steps were a little more confident. The weight of his past still lingered, of course. He couldn't erase the days he had spent in the shadow of poverty, the nights spent wondering if his mother would have enough to feed them, or the way his classmates had looked at him back at Bellwood Academy. But there was a fire within him now that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just Thomas's unwavering belief in him anymore. It wasn't just the high expectations of the school or the push from friends like Maya. No, the fire was his own, born from the realization that he could change his life, that he could do something more than just survive. He could thrive. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling physics class, Ethan found himself alone on the school's rooftop. It was one of his favorite places to go when the weight of everything started to feel too much. The view from the rooftop was breathtaking, overlooking the entire city, with its towering buildings and winding streets. But what always drew him there wasn't the view, it was the silence. Up here, in the stillness of the wind and the vastness of the sky, Ethan could clear his mind. He could breathe. He sat down against the low wall, pulling out the small journal his mother had given him before he left Bellwood. She had told him to write down his thoughts whenever life became overwhelming, to put his feelings on paper so they wouldn't weigh on his heart. At first, he hadn't understood the point. What good was writing down his troubles? It wouldn't change anything. But now, the journal had become his way of processing, of making sense of the storm inside of him. The words flowed easily that day. He wrote about the school, about the people he had met, about the moments of doubt that still crept in, but no longer had the same power over him. He wrote about Maya, and the way she had challenged him to stop hiding from himself, and about Thomas, whose presence had become a steadying force in his life. As he wrote, something occurred to him. He had never truly believed in his own worth before. Sure, he had dreams, hopes, but they always seemed so far out of reach. But now, for the first time, he could see a future, one that wasn't defined by the boundaries of his past. He had been given a chance to start over, to rewrite his own story, and he was ready to take it. Later that evening, after dinner, Thomas invited him to his private office for a meeting. Ethan had been there before, but this time felt different. There was a weight to the air, a seriousness in Thomas's eyes that Ethan hadn't seen before. "Ethan, sit down," Thomas said as soon as Ethan entered the room. He gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk, and Ethan took a seat, his mind racing with questions. "You're doing well here," Thomas began, leaning back in his chair. "Better than I even expected. But I want to know something. How serious are you about this new life? About making the most of the opportunities that have been presented to you?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm serious. I know this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and I'm not going to waste it." Thomas nodded slowly. "Good. That's what I want to hear. But I need you to understand something, Ethan. This life, this world we're in, it's not all easy. It's not always going to be clear-cut. There will be times when you'll be tested, when you'll feel like you can't go on. There will be people who try to bring you down, who will tell you that you don't belong here, that you don't deserve this life. You'll face those obstacles, and it's up to you how you respond." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known that success came with its challenges, but hearing Thomas speak with such conviction made the weight of those challenges feel much more real. "But I've already made up my mind," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm not turning back. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to make something of myself." Thomas studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching, as if he were trying to gauge the depth of Ethan's resolve. Then he smiled, a rare and approving smile that made Ethan's chest swell with pride. "That's the spirit," Thomas said. "You're going to need it." As the evening wore on, they discussed plans for the future, what Ethan wanted to study, the potential for internships with companies Thomas was connected to, the ways in which Thomas could help him build a network. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt like all the pieces were falling into place. For the first time, Ethan saw a clear path before him. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was his to walk, and he was ready to walk it, no matter how long it took or how difficult the road ahead might be. The next few months passed in a blur of hard work and constant challenges. Ethan threw himself into his studies, determined to prove to himself, and to everyone else, that he was capable of more than just surviving. His grades soared, and he quickly gained the respect of his peers and teachers. Slowly, but surely, his confidence grew. He started taking leadership roles in group projects, speaking up more in class, and even mentoring some of the younger students. They were drawn to his story, to his resilience, and they admired his determination. But there were still moments of doubt. There were still nights when he questioned if he was really cut out for this life. It wasn't easy, and sometimes it felt like the weight of expectation was too much to bear. But then he would remember the way he had felt when he first stepped onto this campus, the sense of not belonging, the fear that he was just pretending. And then he would remind himself that he wasn't pretending anymore. He was here. He had earned his place. He was becoming the person he had always wanted to be. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in the library, lost in a book, a familiar face approached him. It was Maya, her expression full of energy and excitement. "Guess what?" she asked, practically bouncing with anticipation. Ethan raised an eyebrow. His curiosity piqued. What? They asked me to join a team of students to work on a project for the National Robotics Competition, she exclaimed. And I want you to be a part of it. Ethan felt a surge of excitement course through him. Robotics. He had always been fascinated by technology, by the way things worked. The idea of being a part of something that could change the world was thrilling. Are you serious? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Absolutely. Maya said. You've got the skills, Ethan. I've seen you work. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for, and this could be your chance to really make an impact. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to prove not just to the world, but to himself that he was capable of greatness. He smiled, a grin that reached his eyes, and nodded. I'm in. As they made plans to meet with the team the next day, Ethan couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time in his life, he was no longer the kid in the back of the room, the one who was overlooked and dismissed. He was part of something bigger now, and he was ready to fight for his place in it. The future had always seemed so uncertain, but now it felt like his future was in his hands, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The months that followed were a blur of constant motion, but Ethan couldn't help but feel alive in a way he never had before. His life had completely shifted course, taking him from the dusty, worn streets of Bellwood to the polished marble halls of an elite academy. Yet despite all the changes, there were moments when he felt a deep sense of gratitude that transcended the glitz and glamour of his new life. His involvement in the National Robotics Competition was a turning point. The project, which Maya had invited him to join, quickly became a focal point in his life. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't some charity case, some kid who had stumbled into a better life by accident. No, he had earned every step of the way. He worked tirelessly with his team, collaborating late into the nights, their fingers flying over keyboards, building and testing prototypes that could revolutionize robotics. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when they felt as though they were standing on the edge of failure. But Ethan never gave up. Every setback only fueled his determination to push forward. There were times when he felt overwhelmed by the pressure. The team was counting on him, and while his teammates were brilliant, they could be demanding, sometimes expecting him to deliver results beyond his years. But through it all, Ethan never wavered. The long hours, the mistakes, the failures, they all built him. They forged a resilience inside him that he had never known he was capable of. He wasn't just a boy from a small town anymore. He was a force in the making, a testament to the power of hard work, grit, and belief. When the day of the competition finally arrived, the entire team was on edge, nerves taut as a bowstring. The project they had worked on, a robotic system designed to assist in disaster relief efforts, was ambitious, and they knew it. But despite the looming sense of fear, there was an unshakable belief in their success. Ethan had never felt more sure of anything in his life. This was his moment. This was the proof that everything he had sacrificed, everything he had worked for, was worth it. Standing on the stage, facing an auditorium full of judges, professors, and engineers from around the world, Ethan could feel his heart pounding. But as he watched Maya and the rest of the team introduce their project, something inside him shifted. He didn't feel nervous anymore. He felt proud of what they had built together, proud of what he had contributed. The feeling was more than just about winning. It was about showing the world who he was, who he had become. The presentation was flawless. The robotic system functioned perfectly. Its ability to navigate through simulated disaster scenarios and provide assistance to victims demonstrating not just the technical expertise of the team, but their shared vision of using technology for good. The judges were impressed, nodding approvingly as they watched the system in action. As the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just about the victory. It was about the sheer brilliance of what they had achieved. But for Ethan, the most powerful moment came afterward. As they stood in the hallway, surrounded by congratulatory messages and high fives, Maya pulled him aside, her eyes glowing with excitement. "You did it," she said, her voice full of pride. "You're incredible, Ethan. I always knew you had it in you." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. The validation was overwhelming. But it wasn't just from Maya. It was the recognition that he had done this for himself, that all the long nights, all the doubts, and all the hard work had paid off. He wasn't the same boy who had been expelled from Bellwood Academy. He was someone new, someone better, someone who had risen from the ashes of his past to build something extraordinary. But as much as the victory was sweet, Ethan knew that the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The next day, as he walked back to his dorm, his phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas. He had become a mentor to Ethan in ways the young boy could never have anticipated. More than just the man who had given him a chance, Thomas had become a figure of wisdom and guidance, a constant source of support in his life. The text was simple, but it carried weight. "Meet me in the office," it read. Ethan didn't hesitate. He had grown accustomed to Thomas's sudden meetings, often filled with new opportunities, insights, and challenges. When he arrived at Thomas's office, the door was already open, and Thomas waved him in. "Sit down, Ethan," Thomas said, his voice steady but warm. Ethan took a seat, feeling a sense of anticipation building in his chest. What now? What was coming next? "I've been watching you," Thomas said, folding his hands on the desk. "You've done well. Better than well, actually. You've excelled in ways I didn't even expect. And I want to talk to you about your future." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "My future?" he echoed, a little unsure of what Thomas meant. "Yes," Thomas replied. "I think you're ready for the next step. I've been talking to a few people, some investors, some business leaders, and I believe you have the potential to make a real impact in the tech world. I want to give you an opportunity to intern at one of the most prestigious tech companies in the world. It's a chance to learn from some of the best minds out there. But I need to know if you're ready for it. This is a big move, Ethan. It's the next level." Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of what Thomas was offering. An internship at one of the top tech companies in the world. It seemed surreal, like a dream. He had come so far, and now, it seemed, the world was opening up to him in ways he had never imagined. "I'm ready," Ethan said finally, his voice full of determination. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Thomas smiled, the look in his eyes one of approval. "I knew you would be. You're going to go far, Ethan. I'm proud of you." As Ethan left the office that day, he felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. This was the next chapter of his life. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't just about proving he belonged. It was about creating something lasting, something that could change the world. He wasn't the poor kid from Bellwood anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ethan was certain of one thing. He was ready to walk it. And this time, he wasn't walking alone.